Welcome
Sorry.
to the members of the Tennessee wine world there. So glad you could all join here today for your lunch and learn. And I understand from Adam, this is more of a casual get together and exploration of a topic. And it seems like a big topic for you all right now is the, the tasting fee policy and, how to leverage tasting fees in more meaningful ways from a business perspective. So I'm going to cover some best practices there today. Anything else, Adam, you'd like me to touch on?
Just general upselling, I think, in the tasting room. I think trying to maximize that dollar per head spend is always a
Yeah,
question for everyone.
yes, I understand that. Well, I'll be definitely touching on some of those practices as well. And so as we get started here, just a little bit about my company. So DTC Workshops, I'm located in Northern California, launched about 8 years ago. And since that time, I now have a network of 11 consultants, and I speak as a subject matter specialist across the US, Canada, Australia, and Argentina on all things wine consumer engagement strategy. So that's really my passion and my subject specialty. And so if you have more questions or want to dig deeper after today's lunch and learn, you can find more information at dtcwineworkshops.com. A little bit about me, and you should all be seeing my screen right now. Does that look pretty good? Okay, great. Um, and so, as I mentioned, I launched the company in 2013. And, the goal here is to always advise around best practices on direct to consumer wine sales growth based on the regional need, customer type, winery model. So no one size fits all. You'll find a lot of resources on my website that I invite you to explore as a follow-up. And you'll have everything from video case studies where I've interviewed winery owners and solution providers, as well as my monthly sales blog with tips and tools. Today, we just released the 3 pillars of DTC wine sales success for our June blog, in which I interviewed 3 different style winery executives. So hopefully you'll find that helpful as well. All right, so enough about me. Let's get on to the topic at hand. And so again, looking at I'm gonna go ahead and stop share for just a minute. The big picture today, tasting fees, how to leverage them to sell more wine, how to leverage them really though, to encourage re-engagement to your wine brand. And that's really critical. In the direct to consumer wine world, we know that it's not about the first sale, it's about the second sale and beyond. It's about how consumers choose to re-engage with your wine brand, right? Both in person, online, at events, how they choose to engage through your social media outlets, et cetera. So when it comes down to it, our proven methods are really around the re-engagement strategies. And I'm going to share with you why the tasting fees at various price points and for various experiences need to be leveraged with that in mind. And so I'm going to share my desktop once again with a visual to help us set the tone for today. So this particular visual I share in a lot of my workshops. And I think it's important that we all get on the same page with each other about what's happening, in 2021 when it comes to all things winery consumer engagement. And so again, not one size fits all. I've been out to almost every region across the US, the Finger Lakes and Virginia and Connecticut and our friends in Texas and the Northwest and Paso Robles, now 220 tasting rooms. I speak for almost every winery association, including Napa Valley Vintners and Wine Road Sonoma and the whole bit. So I see it all. I see all shapes and sizes, and I see evolving wine regions as well as the iconic regions alike, leveraging some similar practices that tend to result in higher levels of sales and long-term relationships with brand loyalists. Okay, and that is key. And so when we look at, where it all begins, typically it's the tasting room. Now, of course, we learned a lot this past year in COVID, unfortunately, with having to get creative outside of the tasting room. But in, a perfect world, we're going to think about 80 to 90% of consumer engagement starting, hopefully, where the wine gets tasted in the tasting room. And then from there is a small brand and evolving region in Tennessee. You're going to have some maybe farmers markets. You're going to have some offsite events and wine pourings and things like that, where your brand's going to gain that type of exposure. But I like to start here because if we think about it, this is the show. This is where your brand and your brand ambassadors, your hosts, have the opportunity to connect as brand ambassadors, the region that you represent, okay, the uniqueness, the access points, but it's also where they start to connect your brand, your focus, past, present, future stories. Of course, the beautiful wines that you're presenting. If your wines aren't good, they're probably not going to come back, right? So let's just, that's a given in this discussion today. So with that said, when people step foot in that door of your tasting room, we've learned a lot through COVID in terms of having to require advanced reservation, having to, provide advanced reservation tools or a contact form or an email or phone number for people to get in touch. The types of experiences that a wine brand, typically small, 65% of brands in the US today are considered small. Over 11,000 bonded wineries. We look at 65% of those at 5,000 case producer and under. So I'm speaking to an audience, I believe, that's mainly going to be in that category. And so when you then invite guests to your tasting room for the first time, and you really think about how tasting fees start to play into the discussion, you're pre-qualifying in many ways through your digital outlets, through your winery website, your marketing, your social media sites, etc. So I've helped winery associations in Colorado, in the central coast of California, all over the nation. In some cases, evolving regions launch tasting fees across the nation for the first time. So about 4 years ago in Colorado, we did a roadshow between Denver and Pacific Palisades and that whole area, 200 tasting rooms strong now in Colorado. Okay, so I know the objections. I know the concerns initially when you haven't been charging tasting fees and now it's time to. So let's just start there. So one, as a region there in Tennessee, I consider you still in some ways from a consumer experience evolving. And it's important that you're all on the same page about the average tasting fee value, right? So it's not very fair when the guy up the street is charging $5 or $10 for an experience that should cost 15, 20 based on what's being offered. It hurts everybody. So as an association, it's important that you all come to agreement on associating the right value of your tasting fee to the experience being offered. Okay. And so today, tastings come in two flavors. They come in the walk-in general public tasting, which we still feel in our areas of Sonoma, Central Coast, Texas, evolving regions, around a $15 price point is fair for the walk-in experience that guests receive at typically a tasting bar with a shared host, okay? Anywhere from 5 to 6 tastings typically we're looking at in that scenario. Maybe you go and you give a surprise reserve pour. Maybe it's your current releases. Maybe you're doing a comparative, whatever that looks like, it's about a $15 fee that we feel is fair for evolving regions in that walk-in tasting format. It allows you to also leverage those walk-in style tasting fees towards wine purchase. And typically how we do the math here is we look at your average bottle price, right? And we aim for about 3 bottles per couple minimum to waive that tasting fee. And in the DTC space, if you're selling bottles under $20, it's really hard to get competitive with things like incentives, like waiving tasting fees, like providing shipping incentives. So as a rule of thumb, when you all as a region start to do your math and think about how to leverage a $15 walk-in tasting fee, for example, to a wine purchase, try to be around that $20 minimum bottle price. That's where then you can ensure that you stay profitable and that there's a fair give-get for what's being offered. Okay, this is not Starbucks. People aren't coming in for their $7 latte, okay? They're getting a wine educator. They're getting a really cool experience. They're drinking some delicious award-winning wines in many cases. They're being invited back to something very cool, maybe some upcoming events, etc. So typically anywhere from 45 to minute to an hour experience at that tasting bar. So when you start to think about a minimum of $60 to waive a $15 tasting fee, you're pretty good. If it's a couple and they're buying maybe 3-4 bottles, leave it up to your discretion. Do you waive both tasting fees? Typically it's one $15 per $3 bottle purchase, and then you can work out the rest. But you could also use incentives like, but you know what, you talked about joining the club today. Let me see if I can waive both of those tasting fees because you're joining our club. Okay. So you always want to think about the tasting fee as truly being your tool to convert at a higher level, to get people into that second engagement, whether it be club conversion or an invitation back to maybe one of your seated tastings. Okay, that's the goal of that $15 tasting fee. Wineries do not get rich on tasting fees. And I've done all the math with our friends at Charles Krug and Wente and all my big guys, J. Lors of the world. And, you know, we support the big brands, we support the little guys. And when we slice and dice all the profit centers and do all the math, nobody's ever made money on tasting fees, period. And so when that becomes a profit center, you gotta ask questions, right? Go ahead, Adam.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, you know, what's your opinion on, you know, waiving the tasting fee as opposed to keeping the tasting fee but giving a tchotchke?
Added value, right? And so people don't like it. I mean, we tried that. The only time that the tchotchke works is if you're upselling on the wine side. But when it comes to tasting fee, there's a set expectation in the mind of consumers today. They know that wine brands will waive tasting fees. So it's really hard to get around waiving a tasting fee. And that conversation is always going to come up.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So use it as a sales incentive, right? For that first visit, use it as an opportunity to get people on board and connected. And when they start to come back, whether it's an event or that seated tasting next, or they come back as a club member, there's been an expectation set. And so, so I've talked about one flavor. Let's move on to the second flavor, and that's that seated reservation experience. Now, this is where we don't always waive the fee. And as your region progresses and moves on with maybe a variety of tastings and tours or seminar style seated experiences, there's a price that needs to be associated to simply cover your costs of a dedicated host, an educator, you know, special glassware that needs to be ordered in a more seminar style, advanced, you know, style tasting. So in some cases, the food complement with the pairing, right? The more reserve style wines for those experiences need to be accounted for. So when we start to think about what that all means, we're seeing those seated reservation experiences anywhere from $25 per person to $150, depending on the experience in the region. And so when you think about it, you know, the leverage of, you know, that particular fee being waived is a little bit different. And so what we typically will require is a threshold be met. And so just like I talked about with the 3 bottles, a good, you know, number to think about the $15 waiver, we think about dollar value. So, and it's one or the other. So either, let's just call it a group of 2 again, come in at a $50 tasting fee per person. They, you know, spend $100 online to make a reservation in some cases with your reservation software, or maybe when you get there, it's a best practice to charge online in advance, by the way, for those type of experiences, because as your region becomes more and more competitive, people will no show. If they've made 4 reservations in a day, you're number 4, and they've already been running late all day, they're having a great time, maybe they've overly consumed, and they have not invested with an advanced reservation for you, you're very likely going to get cut and they're not going to show up. And you have now a reserved table, the glassware set up, at a dedicated host ready to go, and you've just wasted that $100 that's not, you're never going to, you know, recoup. And so when it comes to advanced level or seated reservation experiences and tours, do collect somehow online. Doesn't always have to be software. Sometimes it can be a website form and a WordPress and PayPal or Square, whatever it is that you want to put together in a simplified fashion. Do make sure to charge ahead. And then have some verbiage that says, you know, we're covering our costs with these special seminars and experiences to make sure you have a great time. We got a dedicated host, we got special glassware, we have all of our food costs. So we appreciate you understanding that we're going to charge up front. But when you spend some time with us, depending on, you know, depending on your wine purchase or what have you, we may be able to work with you, you know, at the time of visit. So something like that kind of sets the right tone, because people will always ask. And I don't care if it's like Dariush or Opus One. I mean, you know, we think about it, people in the back of their mind are looking for some kind of incentive to buy more or to convert. Okay, we've seen it in the luxury side, play all the way out to our more value price brands. So that's where you have to decide, you know, what is your minimum threshold to waive $100 in tasting experience fees? Is it going to be they need to buy a case of wine? Is it going to be that they need to join an annual club at $1,000 value in club releases, right? So that's where you as a business owner needs to own that. But I'll give you some simple math. You know, when your club members leave with a case of wine in their trunk and you're giving them 20 or 25% off the top for that case that they just left with their member discount. Let's just say we do some quick math. Let's say your average bottle price is $30. They're leaving with a $360 case of wine that you just gave them 20% off the top on, $72 off the top on. You know, if it's 25%, it's closer to $90, right? So you start to do some math and cost of acquisition of new customers buying a case in that same scenario. Does it make sense to waive the $100 tasting fees if they're buying almost $400 in wine, $500 in wine, let's call it, whatever it is? So just, I want you to think through this a little bit today. I'm giving you a lot of information quickly, but this is typically how, when we sit down in strategic sessions with business owners of all shapes and sizes, this is how we get to an understanding of what is smart for their particular brand in their particular region. And you want to be competitive and you want to be mindful. So if you're ever uncertain, then when you do this math and you have these discussions about which way to go, always make sure to shop your top 3 to 5 complementary wine brands in your region, as well as maybe your top 3 to 5 competitors. And are you in alignment then with what they're doing? And that will give you typically the guidance you need to make the right decision about how to price your tasting fees for both the walk-ins versus the seated experiences, and then how to leverage the tasting fees as tools to convert at a higher level. So let's pause there for a little bit because I want to take that first section and get any type of feedback or questions you all have. What are your thoughts about where I'm going here?
Well, I'm just kind of curious. So I don't know how many wineries in our state are currently offering a higher end seated experience. And I think that it's something that would be beneficial for a lot of them to do. Because if the owner or winemaker spends 30 minutes time with the upscale group, it's amazing the impression and brand ambassadors they create from that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also what's nice about those seated experiences is that when your guests make advanced reservations to come in, it can be simple. It could be a phone call to start or a personal email that you put on your website. It doesn't have to be super fancy, but the point is you can understand who these people are before they arrive. Are they in your order management system? Have they been in before? Are they influential in your community? Are they traveling for business, right? Are they from the trade? Are they from the local wine industry? So there's a lot that you can glean with the reservation data about who it is that you're presenting to. And then you can customize the storytelling, customize the wine presentation to convert at a much higher level. So the average order values, and I have a blog that I wrote about this when I sat on the Silicon Valley Bank on Wine survey report about 4 or 5 years ago with Duckhorn and a few others. The average order values we started to uncover about 5, 6 years ago in the survey for the seated tastings versus the walk-in tasting, bar tasting. Started off the walk-in tasting, bar tasting. This was 800 respondents across the US, so it's a big average number, but it was about $75 average order value. And it got higher, of course, like in Napa, it was like $99 or $100. Down in Central Coast, maybe it was like $65. But the point is, it was $75 average order value for the walk-in tasting, experience versus the seated came in at almost $300. So what we started to see happening, I was at like $395, it's almost $400 actually. We started to see happening then over the last 4 or 5 years in a row, the common thread in this report is that the seated tasting experience was a good 3 to 4 times greater average order value than the tasting bar experience, because it is that dedicated host. It is that rich storytelling. It is that, personal connection that you're forming.
And I know a lot of our wineries on right now already have operations, but Larry's just thinking about setting up his first tasting room. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a good way to consider, because you can kind of frame it from the get-go, how you want your business to operate.
Absolutely. That's right. So that this is where you really can, you can control the visitor experience. You don't want to be stuffy. And this is the thing I always get, I'm actually the executive director of the Calaveras Wine Grape Alliance up in the Sierra Foothill wine region of California. goes back to the gold rush era, Mark Twain and the whole bit, 1850s. So we're talking 40 tasting rooms, all family run and operated. And we have this discussion a lot as we progress as a region, because now we've got visitors from LA and the Bay Area and you know, high and Napa, Sonoma, where they have these expectations that are driving the type of experience these small family run craft, truly craft, you know, brands are having to offer. But we never want to come across as stuffy or unauthentic as a region. And so I would say the same thing for you all there. Like, what is authentic and on brand for your region? You know, that warm hospitality that you want to offer. So when you think about the tasting experience type, is it like a tour and, you know, barrel tasting comparative? You know, is that more genuine to what's happening there in your region? Or is it a seated vertical style discussion about some wines you've been making the last 10 years? You know, so you just got to really think through what that advanced style seated tour tasting entails and test it out sometimes as a community and give each other feedback over time about what works and what doesn't. But going back to the conversion workflow that you see here. So you can see where I'm going here though. It's that first visit, it's that first experience. You know, I call it a hybrid model. A lot of times when a tasting room has both the tasting room bar walk-in experience with also some tables for the seated experiences, or maybe a dedicated tasting lounge or member lounge space. That's considered a hybrid, where the visual is that you've got best of both worlds. If you want to be that visitor who can come in on the fly and not be required to make a reservation, or you don't want something too fancy, fine. You got the tasting room bar always available during your operational hours. But then on the flip side, when guests can see those tables that have the little tent cards or table cards that say reserved, there's some intrigue happening. Or maybe they walk in and they see some umbrellas in a patio that says, you know, member lounge space. There's intrigue from a visual cue perspective. And so that first time visitor, maybe it's two couples coming in, what are they going to do a lot of times at the tasting bar? They're going to ask questions. Oh, how do we get to sit out there on that beautiful patio space? Or how do we get into that seated area that you got in that VIP room? You know, what's that all about? So what you're doing is you're letting visitors self-identify about what they're interested in when you position those type of two different style experiences. So I call it the hybrid. And our clients, especially small to mid, have had the best success in continuing to offer both. But when we go back to this visual, what happens with that is this. Where are you going to go next? You know, from a tasting room, first time experience to deepening the relationship and inviting back. And one of my best practices at DTC Wine Workshops is that you always invite qualified guests to return before they ever leave that front door. And when we spend too much time training our hosts, our pours on selling club, because that's the only conversion incentive we give them. You know, it's a flat rate, $20, $30 for selling club. You know, the problem there is they're so focused on selling club, they're not as focused on building a relationship and inviting back. So from an incentive perspective, it's really important that you get your staff thinking about how to talk about the next visit with your qualified audience. We'd love to invite you back to our cool new tasting and tour that we're doing out in the barrel room this summer. You know, we're starting them early in the morning, so you stay nice and cool at 9:30. We kick off with a welcome splash and we get into a cool tour of the vineyards. We're checking out the barrel room. You know, our winemakers giving you some tastings right from our barrels so you can see what that tastes like versus what you get in a bottle. You know, for evolving regions, that educational aspect, when people are still learning about wine and about your region, that's an exciting opportunity to come back and have something that cool with the winemaker. And so paying your staff a little incentive, sometimes it's $3, $5 per reservation they're making to get those guests back when they're ringing up their wine, to come back for that tour tasting, whether it's a ticket or a special day of the month you're offering that, to get that closed before those guests leave. That's valuable because you're also collecting their name, their email, their phone number to get them signed up.
That's a great piece of advice. I don't think any of us are really focused on that. We focus on the club sign up, but not the invite back.
Yeah. And that's the key to success long-term. It's building that contact database of every qualified order that you ring up that first sale in the tasting room, actually having a name and an email associated at the bare minimum. Not everybody's going to give you their phone number the first time, unless it is for, let's say, a special event or experience that you're personally inviting them to, then maybe they're going to give you their phone number to get signed up. But at the very least, we teach teams on how to add a name and email with every qualified order. And this is just one way. But, other ways is, while we're getting your order set up, I want to make sure I get you in the system because I want to make sure you get invited back to that new summer experience that I told you we're offering. Okay. So if they don't sign up right away for that, let's call it 2 weeks down the road on a Saturday, we've got this really cool tour event happening, make sure that you get a name and email so they can be invited back. And that just sounds friendly. It sounds warm and welcoming. It sounds like high touch hospitality. It doesn't sound salesy, does it? And so those are some tips I want to make sure I give you when you're thinking about where you begin with tasting fee and how important it is. You got a strategy behind that so people don't feel off put. But then even you're out of state over time, in evolving region, you start to see a lot of crossover, people from out of state asking about wines getting shipped, right? And so it's that first experience then to make sure you give them some kind of an incentive. You're talking about getting 6 bottles shipped to your home and whatever, XYZ state. Let's get you let's see if I can get you a special shipping offer on that, or maybe we can get you some cold packs this summer added. So, you want to think about that as a tool also. Could you waive possibly a tasting fee if they're going to have a case shipped to their home, a 6-pack of expensive wine shipped to their home? So always have kind of some back pocket tools that your staff can leverage to sell more. And then think about how you can roll it into some shipping incentive. You're going to buy a case, what? Let's see if we can get some cold packs added, or let's see if I can get, maybe a $10, $20 shipping deal on that for you. So what we're doing here is we're not talking about discounts. We're not talking about deeply discounting wine. We're talking about doing the right thing for the customer. And that's important in the DTC world. You can get into a 60% profit margin, bottom line, when you start to be smart at the beginning about setting your minimum pricing, your average bottle prices, knowing what your average order values are. So the tasting fee is just one tool to get there, right? And then we talked about the club, the invite back that I just touched on. But this is another piece that it's important to think about and when to leverage things like tasting fees to get people coming back. So when you've got an audience of let's say 2 or 3 couples for that walk-in tasting, and you, through good conversation skills and open-ended dialogue, realize they live within an hour drive time, half an hour drive time, even better. We consider that our local audience, and that is your sweet spot. That is where people will re-engage with your wine brand in person at your events, coming back into your tasting room, bringing friends, coming in for seminars, joining your club. That's where that's going to happen 4 to 6 times a year at best. You're out of state, it could be once, it could be twice maximum. Same thing on the membership side. Time is the #1 commodity today. So this piece also is really important that you uncover immediately to get people coming back then. If you know that they're half-hour drive time, up to an hour drive time, they can come back in the next month or 2 pretty easily versus having to book airfare. Okay. So bumping them up to a VIP tasting next time they come. You mentioned you live right up the road. I'd love to personally invite you back and get you scheduled for one of our VIP tastings or one of our, tours. And so having that conversation is really important. And then keeping things fresh every season. So every quarter at the minimum, I say, have something new you can invite people back to. Because even your club members get bored with the same old song and dance, the same old club party, the same old club dinner theme. They're going to want things over time if they're going to continue a long-term relationship. They want to continue to be intrigued and inspired. And when it comes to masters of storytelling in the DTC space, we always want to make sure that our loyalists know what your past, present, and future stories are, that they can visualize themselves. They know when they come back in and re-engage what that past story was from the last experience. They know what your present story is based on what they're engaging with today. It could be at an event or a new tasting or tour. But then when your hosts, your storytellers are planting visuals and intrigue about what the future story is, and your loyalists see themselves on that path of your future with your brand, doing it with you, that's where you're golden, whether they become club members or not. So today, 8% to about 20% of visitors, depending on the scenario, the shape and size of the winery, the region, the longevity, all that good stuff, the model, 8 to 20% will join a club their first time. It's a big range. And we watch it really closely with our clients across the US. So what my point is here is 80% then of the time, you're leaving a lot of money and opportunity on the table if your focus is only conversion to club. Okay. So come up with that, 2 to 3 things that your staff, your frontline can be inviting people back to any given season. What are you doing in the spring that's different from the summer or the fall? Have an annual calendar with 4 really cool events ready to roll. I love it when some of our small brands have these big chalkboard walls in the tasting room with their event schedule up for the year. We have a really fun one up here in the foothills. They have these really cool trailers, these gourmet fun wine and food trailers, and they call it their trailer park, tasting event where they bring in food trucks. They do an ugly pajama party during the holidays. I mean, they have a lot of fun outside of the typical. And they get a lot of club conversion because of that chalkboard wall, I tell you. So again, keeping things authentic to your region, to your brand experience. So those are the main touch points I have when it comes to kind of this whole conversion workflow piece. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tracking piece in your systems and ways to build success month over month by staying on top of how well your staff is using the tasting fees as a conversion tool. But one other point I want to bring up, and I'm going to stop share and get you into my next slide here, is that it's important also when you're thinking about your sales strategy with tasting fees to also think about what consumers want today. Now, some of this might not be happening yet in your region. Again, I'm respectful of what's happening with the evolving spaces versus iconic. But what we've learned a lot in the last 10 years of the direct-to-consumer wine world, as we've all evolved together, is that most wine consumers that consider themselves to be a luxury buyer. And luxury, by the way, a luxury price point in direct-to-consumer is $30 bottle and up. But they like to experience the unexpected. And this goes back to the Mondavis and the Trinqueros and the Krugs and the Wentes, who formed the expectations early on in the 60s, 70s and on with the jug wines coming back into the tasting rooms in St. Helena and in parts of California, is that they knew how to deliver the unexpected whenever their loyalists would re-engage, showing a little bit behind the curtain of what was happening behind the scenes or what was coming up next, or giving them some secret insights on what they had planned in the next year. Okay, that goes back to the future storytelling piece that I talked about. Meaningful, interesting experiences. The younger qualified generation today are all about doing business with brands they admire, brands who provide an educational, authentic experience. It's very important that you remember that when you're catering to that younger demographic. Online advanced reservations. So again, as we all get more and more busy, having the luxury, especially your club members, of calling ahead or going online to a form or sending you an email to make an advanced reservation when they want to bring their family out or their best friends when they're visiting. That's everything. That's service right there, because they know they've reached out ahead. They're going to have a table prepared. They're going to feel like VIPs. And then personalize it. So not speaking to your club members, your 5, 10-year club members, the same way you're going to speak to a first-time visitor. When you re-engage, when you invite back, when you send a personal note, etc. Flat rate shipping, I touched on a little bit. It's not going to be a big part of our talk today. Video, mobile-friendly tools. So over time, using some, 1 to 2 minute videos from your iPhone. Making sure your website's mobile-friendly through the iPhone and smartphones. The Androids and all that good stuff. Because 65% plus of winery website visitors in the US are coming today through mobile devices. Okay, it's a huge uptick in the last 2 to 3 years, and a lot of it through COVID. Social interaction, appreciations, and recognizing your loyalists in Facebook and Instagram at least once, twice a week. Huge for expanding brand reach. Saying thank you, inviting back. And then lastly, down the road, you're going to probably see in the next 3 to 5 years in your area more and more demand for people to be texted. Okay, you text me that reminder. Can you text me information on that event that's coming up? Can you text me this about my club membership? So watch that. If you get more and more demand around text communication with email open rates declining steadily year over year, you got to think about your order management system, your Square. Can you enable text through some of those tools to stay better connected? All right, let's open it up for another Q&A before I start to wrap this up.
bashful guys. It's okay.
No bad questions at all. No bad feedback.
Larry, what's running through your head, Larry, as you're trying to plan out your tasting rooms, and if you're going urban versus rural? Oh, you're muted. Larry, you're muted. Hold on. There you go. Nope, still can't hear you.
Yeah.
Right now.
There we go.
Okay, sorry. I think I had you muted on my end too. I was saying urban is still rural for me because I'm in a small town. But I mean, all these things are very, very interesting. I was just thinking, find somebody who understands all this stuff to operate my tasting room and do these kinds of things.
Yeah, sure. Great. And we do a lot of training around that too. We're having to bring a lot of people from outside the industry in post-COVID. So that's what we do. We train people, you can train people with great hospitality backgrounds and a heart of service and warmth and, taking care of people. You can train them on wine knowledge, but it's really hard to train people who are super geeky wine knowledge people on how to have hearts of hospitality. We've learned.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. After I looked at your website, I noticed you do those workshops. So I can see where it would be very beneficial, obviously.
For sure. Got a great group. And then I'm seeing also Rhonda and Richard, Rebecca. How are you all feeling about some of this information? Or do you have any questions about, how you would take some of these tools maybe and bring them forward?
We've kind of been teetering with the idea of the online and advanced reservations, if for nothing else, just for our tours of the
Great.
Facility and wine cellar picnics and stuff. But it's always better when someone else thinks about it.
Yeah, I know for sure.
Someone else has done all the guinea pig work. So
I hear you.
Sandra, Rhonda operates the oldest running winery in the state at Highland Manor. So they've got historical Highland Manor.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And what is it all about?
What our winery, we are very rural, much like Larry was saying, and but we're near a national park basically, and we get a lot of horseback riders, a lot of hikers, and other than that, there's not a lot to do in our area. We don't even have like a hotel really, so we've become more of a tourist destination. So we have to be the Chamber of Commerce, the visitor center, have all the flyers and everything, in addition to our wines and tap room and all that kind of stuff.
I see. Wow, that's a lot going on. And what year do you date back to?
1980.
Okay.
Hey, it's when the law was changed.
Okay, got it.
1980 legally. We don't talk about everything else before that.
Yeah, got you. But I mean, right here, I just kind of see that you've got some really cool picnic in the cellar options, and you've got some tours that you're offering. So you've got some different flavors of experiences that people can come out and enjoy. I like your visuals, so I think you're setting the right tone. Also, your website looks good. I mean, you're not overkilling it on the homepage with too many call to actions. You take people right into your story, into buying wines, exploring. So I think you're on the right track.
Thank you. Harvest Host, that's the spot there where the RV friendly. Harvest Host has been, especially during COVID, that was very beneficial when people were, just traveling via RV. Right. And we have a huge parking lot where we allow them to set up and all that. So that was fun to at least see people trying to get out when they weren't 100% sure about getting out.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's just, being mindful of what visitors want at different times and switching things up from time to time is really important. Yeah.
I think it's important to mention that the state is we don't really have really congested areas. A lot of them are rural. We have, Gatlinburg has a handful of them all together. So it would be really important that they are all on the same page when it comes to like pricing and stuff. But I was
Gotcha.
curious if you had recommendations for some of the ones who they're not planning for winery trips, and
Yeah.
they're going to stop by because they saw an internet or an interstate sign, so like how did they do their pricing and understand, because
That's a
it's
good
not the
question.
same as Gatlinburg, which has a bunch, or Sonoma or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Yeah, we call that a destination winery versus a wine trail winery, right? And so destination marketing, destination wine brands, you have to really think differently about packaging the experience. So like, I think it's so smart that you're saying, we're going to package it something where you come out and stay a weekend. So having that RV horse trailer thing dialed in is very smart. And then starting to put together packages with lodging partners, adventure companies, your surrounding tasting rooms, like where they could do a whole weekend with an itinerary, dialed in for them. That's the destination brands have a great opportunity to lock it in for a whole weekend of, exploration and visitation versus the, wine trail areas where people are just kind of like trying to get 4 to 5 tasting rooms in a day, and they're running from one to the other. So that each has its pros and cons, right? Yeah. So coming up with that event calendar, that quarterly event calendar is everything for destination brands, and making sure that when people know they've got to plan time to come out in advance, to travel and set up a whole weekend, that they're going to do it around that quarterly event, maybe that fall, harvest party or a spring fling party or whatever it is you're doing, where they can put that on their calendar 3 months out.
So Sandra, what's your experience with
So as
wine?
far-
Sorry, what was that?
What's your experience with wine trails?
Mm-hmm. So wine trails, there's the pros and cons. Of course, the pros are you're going to see a higher volume of people every day, right? So cycling through that high volume and being in that high volume play and having the right staff, ratio to visitor is really important to make sure there's a good experience. So you got to have a greeter at the front door Friday through Sundays. You got to have crowd control, backup plans, overflow spaces. So it's a little bit of a different feel. And like a balancing act then of saying, how do we still deliver a really good experience? Like our friends at Silver Oak, our friends at Cake Red, and we're talking hundreds and thousands of visitors per year. It's a very different world. We've got to talk about having runners and, using iPads at the tables to get people checked out quickly and then package off to their car. And so the opportunities there really are to invite back to the events, invite back to something that's more high touch and intimate outside of that, first time busy tasting experience. Get them into a private room, get them out to a tour at 9:30 in the morning next time they come back with the winemakers. So you can build that intimacy. And that's again where that second experience, that second engagement is everything. So to wrap up, I know we're at 10:19. We talk about tasting fees and how to leverage them as tools. Just some words to wisdom there. So for tracking purposes over time, you're looking at monthly sales performance, quarterly, annual. You always want to think about setting up the tasting fee SKUs, for let's say you do a $10 or $15 out of the gate, but then you have your comp codes or your promo codes in your order management system, okay, based on the different scenarios. And it's really important that you think about that from reporting perspective down the road. So for example, let's say maybe you do a $10 tasting fee, you make it a 2-bottle minimum. You just make it flexible. You don't have a price point or what have you. So what you want to think about doing with your staff is just a quick ring up in the point of sale. They got the 2 bottles. They show 2 tasting fees for a couple. They're going to waive one of the tasting fees using a promo code or comp code that's just literally waive TF, 100%, right, for one. And so that's an easy way, whatever order management system you're using, to make sure that it's reportable down the road, that shows with each transaction was a tasting fee incentive leverage to make that sale. And if so, what was the average order value then for doing that? And then, so maybe you got a waive tasting fee, just generic, but then maybe you got also another promo code that says waive TF club sign up, something like that. So it's going towards club conversion versus wine sales. So just a couple of different words of wisdom there. Over time, things can get muddy when you're trying to analyze sales performance and conversion performance if you've got just one generic discount code in whatever order management system you're using. So at least have 2, one for the wine sale, one for club conversion, and then know what your thresholds are. Make sure you monitor weekly or monthly to make sure your staff's doing the right thing. They're not just having their BFFs come in and, you know, giving them a bunch of free tastings all the time. So that's the best way to control it. And at a later time, you know, if we all want to talk about ways to leverage tasting fee SKUs in more meaningful ways by customer type, we can talk about that later. But at the very least, have 2 straightforward tasting fee comp codes. All right, any final questions as we wrap up on this topic?
Sandra, thank you for your time today.
You're
Good.
welcome.
Thanks, Sandra. I enjoyed the part that I caught. I'll go back and watch the recording. Ironically, our guy showed up kind of a little bit early. They're doing a mural on the side of our winery. So
Okay.
I didn't think he'd show up. It was raining. He showed up and said, "Hey, I need help." So sorry for running late.
That happens. I totally get it.
That's the fun thing
Well,
with these lunch and learns is we capture everyone in the middle of the workday.
You're trying to get lunch in, you're multitasking, the phone's ringing. Well, I invite you all to re-engage with me in DTC Wine Workshops. Check out our blog, our case study series. We've got coaching packages, you know, if you want to work on specific initiatives or opportunities. Thank you, Adam, for having me. Really appreciate chatting with you all today.
Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
out, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Cheers.
Hi, guys.